I've been sitting with something lately and I wanted to share it with you. This is actually the first video on this channel, and so it feels like a right place to start. One of the things that I love to do with my son Daniel is watch off-grid survival video channels on YouTube. These people are so amazing. It's usually a man or a woman by themselves building these incredible cabins with just hand tools. They are chopping and stacking wood, foraging for food, starting fires with sticks. And most of this is done in extreme weather, and they usually have a dog with them, which I think is kind of fun. But it's just amazing. It's amazing what people can do. And in particular, there's one channel of this man who is out, I think, in the bush in Australia somewhere. And he, through a super laborious process, is taking clay out of the earth and he forms it into bricks that he builds a kiln with. He fires them, he builds a kiln, and then once that's ready, he takes more of that clay and he builds roof tiles. Now he'll put a whole batch of tiles into the kiln, and sometimes he'll fire it, he'll go through the process, but then no tile. I mean, maybe he gets 2 tiles from it. And then sometimes he'll put a batch in and those tiles all come out serviceable. They might be a little bit chipped and rough hewn and have some cracks on them, but he's using them to cover the roof of this little hut that he's building. And it's just amazing. And so something that I have been thinking about a lot lately is wondering when I watch him is how many of those tiles that he puts on the roof are strong enough to stay intact for this little hut, at least until his next video. And if my life has proven anything over the years, it's that I am so not the strong one in my story. I feel like I'm more of those tiles that he pulls out, like the first batch where everything like crumbles and there's hardly anything usable at all. In the last 10 months, this has been so evident in my life. This past July, I lost my husband, Michael, and it happened really fast, his illness and passing all in a matter of weeks. And it's left me totally adrift, just kind of moving through my life without any direction at all. And memories of losing my first husband, which happened in 2001, those memories are coming back and sort of mixing with everything that I remember from Michael's passing. And it just kind of like, that's sort of my reality, right? These looped images through my mind. That's what I think about a lot. And as this happened, I was just starting to catch my breath a little bit. And then in February, my son and I moved in with my mom because she has dementia. And it was evident she couldn't live alone any longer. And it feels like almost overnight, like just from February, I have watched her going from being able to go to lunch or a quick Target run to being super confused and hallucinating and unable to perform the simplest tasks like getting dressed or even remembering my name. If you are watching and you're someone who has gone through or is going through someone, being with someone who has this horrible disease, like my heart just goes out to you because it's really hard and it's a super lonely place to be. And as I try and wrap my head around this and having to make decisions for my mom that we never talked about. I'm her only child, but there was never any conversation like, hey, honey, when the time comes, if this ever happens, these are my wishes. This is what I would want. And so I am having to do this on my own. There are no siblings I can talk to. She only has one sister, and she lives in Northern California, and she's in no position to care for my mom. And so it's been really hard to think about what, her future is going to look like. And I've had to process that on my own. So lately, I've spent a lot of time with 2 Corinthians 4:7. And this is what it says. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that all surpassing power is from God and not from us. Now, at its core, that verse just shows us that God is choosing to place his treasure, his power, his spirit within us, within his children. We are the jars of clay, right? Fragile, imperfect vessels, uniquely made and purposely placed in a broken world. And I love that. I mean, that is huge. But I knew there had to be other verses about jars of clay in God's word. And of course there are. So this was more Old Testament. Now, just a little bit during that time, jars of clay would have been used by, like, in every single household. They would have probably been a dime a dozen, just very ordinary, used to hold everything, used to hold your water, your flour, your spices, your oil, used to mix your bread in. I'm sure there were some wooden bowls, and jars of clay would have just been so prevalent everywhere. Everyone would have used them. So getting back to looking for other stories where there were jars of clay used, the first one that came up for me was Gideon. Now, Gideon was an Israelite, and he was a prophet and a judge and a military guy. And by his own admission, he and his family was like lowest rung on the ladder. He was a nobody, basically, in his family. And he's out one day on the threshing floor, and an angel of the Lord appears to him and calls him a mighty man of valor. And he's probably thinking to himself, like, wait a minute, like, who are you talking to? Certainly not me, because that is not who I am. However, God chooses Gideon to lead an army to defeat their enemies. Now, at that point, God says to Gideon, bring me what you have. And it was 32,000 men. And God said, that's too much. Tell everybody that really doesn't want to be here that they can leave and see what's left. So we go from 32 to 10,000. And then God says, that's still too much. If it's this many, they're going to want to take credit for what I'm about to do. So he says to Gideon, take them down to this river, watch the way they drink. It's this like really wackadoodle thing. And that leaves them with 300 men. So God's like, all right, I'm going to take these 300, and he gives them ram's horns and clay vessels that they're going to put torches in. God uses those three things with 300 men to defeat their enemies with no loss of life to Israel, which is so amazing. And there's another story, which I'm sure a lot of you might be familiar with, and that is a widow woman who has just enough flour and water to make a last meal for her and her son. And then after that, they are absolutely prepared to die. But here comes the prophet Elijah, and he sees this woman, and he says to her, hey, look, I want you to take what you have and make a loaf of bread for me, feed it to me first, and then whatever's left over, you and your son eat. And so she does it. She is obedient. She doesn't question it. And because of her obedience, God takes her flour and her oil and he multiplies it. And she has enough to get her little family through like 3.5 years of famine, the worst famine that Israel had ever seen. And then there was another widow. She goes to the prophet Elisha, and she's desperate. And she's like, my husband died, left me in terrible debt. And I have these creditors are like knocking at my door, trying to get me to pay up. And they say, if I don't, they're going to take my sons into slavery. He says, right, what do you have? What do you have that we can work with? And she says, the only thing I have is this small little flask or jar of oil. And he says, all right, have your sons go throughout your neighborhood, collect as many jars from your neighbors as they possibly can, bring them into your home with the boys, shut the door, and start pouring. And in her obedience, she does exactly all of that. God takes her little flask of oil and lets it fill up so many jars, all of these jars, until there are absolutely none left. And then Elisha says, now sell everything, pay off your debt, and live off the rest. Now, those are amazing stories. And I love that in each one, there are clay jars, clay vessels that these people have that they don't have that much of, I mean, there's such a small amount within these jars, but God says, that's okay. I can use it. I can work with that. So as I read these stories, there's something that stood out, and that was that each of these people, all of them were super desperate. They were in dire straits, up to the point of, we are prepared to die. They're going to take my sons as slaves. This army is going to absolutely defeat us. But even though they didn't have that much to work with, they were all obedient to what God and the prophets called them to do. And in every one of these stories, there are these ordinary, unremarkable vessels, these jars of clay used to display the glory of God's power and provision in the face of these seemingly insurmountable circumstances. Now, you're watching this. To me, it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. None of us have gone through life thus far without some sort of heartache or brokenness or insurmountable circumstance that we thought we could never, ever get out of, or divorce, death, loss of a job, loss of a home, something like that. And in spite of that, we're still here. I mean, for myself, I have spent so much of my life with a scarcity mentality and still wanting to be the strong one, right? But the one who holds it together all the time. And I don't crack under pressure. But that is so not true. And if the last 10 months have made anything abundantly clear, it's that I am not that strong person that I think that I want, that I like to think that I am or that I want to be. I am very much fragile and cracked. I'm so much a jar of clay. And yet I'm talking to you right now. And not because I've done a good job holding it all together, but because God has. And because somehow in the middle of grief and loss and confusion or loneliness, a circumstance, God's power has shown up in my life in ways that have been unfathomable so many times. And it certainly did not come from anything that I did. It was all from God. And I really think that's the point, right? That the jars of clay in all of these stories weren't impressive. They were ordinary, dime a dozen, easily broken and replaceable. But what they carried, God's power, God's spirit, God's provision, that is what mattered. And I think that's true for us too. The strength isn't supposed to come from us. And the cracks don't disqualify us. In fact, they may be the very places where God's light shines through to others around us, making God and His name glorified. So, I don't know how much of my roof is going to stay intact from one season to the next, because there are always going to be circumstances. There's always going to be something that will maybe cause those tiles to crack or shift or even to fall apart. But I do know this: the treasure inside the jar, it's not me. And because of that, because of the beautiful truth that it's Him, I don't have to hold it all together to be held. If this resonates with you, I've written more about it on my blog, and I'm going to link that below. Thanks for watching.